We have Grant and Ben up. They're going to be talking about Basil, making it easy to spin up best practice Python web frameworks. So Grant has developed SOFA statistics application in Python and is a big fan of the language, as I'm sure we all are. He's managed to interest one of his older children into Python programming and is working on persuading his 8-year-old daughter. I wish you the best of luck with that. He has a background in sociology and addictions research. Ben is in his final year of a Bachelor of Information and Communication Technology at Manukau Institute of Technology, where he's been involved in running courses on Python programming for high school students, and he works part-time as a developer at Catalyst IT. He enjoys using Python for projects and writing Python scripts whenever possible. So please welcome.
Right, hi. Okay. Basil is a tool for making it easy to spin up best practice Python web frameworks. But before we look at the experience of learning Python web frameworks, let's have a quick look, a refresher on what it's like to learn Python itself. As we'll all know, if we've tried sharing Python with others, whether they've been programming before or not, it's really quite a good experience. There's instant gratification along the way, like the print hello world statement we've seen, although from one talk we know it's full of bugs, surprisingly. But nonetheless, people can work out what that does. They hit enter and they see the result. They then change it to some other sentence, they hit enter again, and it works like they'd expect. So there's not a lot of boilerplate. And that's why some people have said that Python is sort of like executable pseudocode. So a piece of code like that, people who aren't experienced in the language and its syntax can still work out roughly what that's going to do, or with a little bit of help they'll work it out. And more importantly, they can just quickly run it and see what it does, modify it and so on. The batteries are included in Python. That's another thing, you don't have to spend a lot of time installing things or learning about the ecosystem before you can start doing things like import random and just benefiting from that. And Python is a lot of fun. This is a photo taken from a beginner's workshop we did a couple of years ago in Auckland, and people were learning, and I think many of them were surprised at how much progress they made and how much they enjoyed it. So that's the experience of working with learning Python. But getting started with Python web development is quite a different experience. It's sort of, there's this sysadmin crash course that people have to go through. And you'll know what I mean if you've done it. There's lots of moving parts. Your Python version, Python packages, system packages, your database, then the web server. Maybe you're using the built-in server in Django or not. And if you are trying to use more like a production-ready system, then you've got to get your head around Apache maybe in ModWizgy or Nginx and GUnicorn. You're going to use Supervisor D to sort of spin things up, and so on and so on and so on. And there's blog posts, and they contradict each other. And then do you have salary workers? And oh my goodness. And versioning, do the versions all talk to each other? And what if I want to use Python 3? And so it goes. So there can be some severely delayed gratification in the learning process. I'd like to sort of really emphasize this point that Python web development is unPythonic. Python web development is unPythonic. We're going to fix this, of course, but frustration leads to compromised best practices. Like this one, of course, setting your permissions very liberally, or just giving up. I just can't do this, I don't want to, or I don't have time for this, I'll come back to this later. So that sort of sets the challenge for what we've been trying to do with Basil. We think setting up a new project should be easy. You shouldn't have to be looking at Stack Overflow for hours and hours on end trying to figure out how to configure all the bits and get them talking to each other. It should be fast. Maybe you want to try something out just on a Saturday morning. You don't have a whole weekend to devote to it. Fast is good. Best practice. One thing the PHP community has, their experience has shown us, is that if you start off making certain compromises, maybe security compromises for the purposes of making learning easier, it can be very hard to retrofit into the culture the best practice that you think is what people should be doing. It's not impossible, but it's hard. So we want this to also be best practice as well.
So The tool we've developed called Basil, we feel it really meets this challenge quite nicely. When you're working with Basil, your workflow is basically get Basil installed, get it running, then you pick a template. So for example, if I want a Django web application, I just pick a Django template, or I could also pick a Flask template or Pyramid template. Then I just answer a few simple questions about my project. What's the project name? What's the administrator, username and password? Really simple configuration details that anyone will know when they're setting up a project. Nothing that requires domain expertise in web development and system administration. Then you should be able to start coding. You just want to get in, start playing with things, start trying things out, seeing what happens. And most importantly, you actually want to see something on the screen. You want to get feedback as to how, as to what you're doing and making changes, seeing results, and learning. So to illustrate this, we've got a quick video demonstration of how Basil works. So if I start this. So first of all, you can see this is just the web interface for Basil. That's run locally on your own computer. And first thing you get to do is just, if you want to make a new project, you get to pick what template you want. In this case, the user is going to pick a Django template. Once they've chosen the template, like I said, you get very simple configuration options. In this case, just the project name and administrator details. So the user can go and fill those in quite quickly, click apply, and once they've done that, you'll see that a new project has been basically configured by Basil and is ready to be built. The user can then go and click on the Start button, and this is the point where Basil basically does all the heavy lifting for you. Basil uses a tool called Vagrant to basically create a virtual machine, install all your required packages, system packages and Python packages in that virtual machine, set up the database, set up the web server. It will also create a project folder with all of your required source code. That project folder will be shared from the virtual machine to your host machine so that you can edit the code. And also any required network ports will be forwarded from the virtual machine to the host machine so that you can basically see the results in your web browser. So once the project has been created, you get a few options, such as the View button. And there instantly, we've already got Hello World. We've got something on the screen in a matter of minutes. And yeah, so now at this point, we can start trying things out and playing with things. If the user goes back to the main Basil project manager screen, they can click on the code button for their project, at which point they get a simple file browser pop-up where they can go through and start looking at the code. In this case, the user knows a bit about Django's file structure and knows about views.py, and they open that up and they see a suspicious looking hello world, which they decide, oh well, let's see what happens if I change that to hello PyCon instead. Once they've done that and they've saved the file, they can go back to that browser tab with their project, refresh the page, and they've got some instant gratification. They're now doing web development, they've started, they're editing, they're trying things out. If they want to go a bit further and do some more detailed work, you can shell in to your virtual machine and basically run commands, so you could do stuff with the database or check your services and processes that are running. And finally, because it's all done in a virtual machine, you can basically, when you're not using it, you can stop it so it's not running in the background, as the user will do here. They've got a stop button. And also, because it's a virtual machine, everything's sandboxed, everything for your project is contained within that virtual machine. So when you use Basil's destroy feature, you will be completely annihilating that project and leaving no kind of cruft left on your computer, such as a database or extra packages installed or random stuff that you didn't necessarily want to keep. So yes, that's basically an overview how Basil works. Yeah.
Right. So what's it actually like using Basil on a real project?
Yeah.
What's it like using Impress? Okay, here we are. What I did was I did a project with my son Elliot, and I was using the Flask template. And what you can see here is a game called Black Box. Anyone here familiar with the game? Yep. Maybe a couple? Yep. Well, I hadn't seen it, so that was quite a fun project. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that Basil didn't really get in the way. Basil sort of took care of spinning everything up, and Flask took care of the web stuff to some extent. So a lot of the work was basically the game logic and the user experience of the game itself, black box, which is what you really want when you're trying to learn something, is you want to build the thing you're interested in. There's some potential for making the templates more Pythonic still, so there's some, if you like, some more batteries included we could have. So like jQuery, you might want to use something else, but there's no harm in having that small file in the middle of this virtual machine in the right location. I think it's static/JS is a good place for it in Flask, so why not include that? So you don't have to install things to start making a game or whatever. There's some files that Heroku likes. I think it was procfile and requirements.txt. We can also stick in the templates any other files we like sort of README for teaching someone how to set things up. There's plenty of room.
So what are some of the main use cases that we envision for Basil? Who's going to benefit the most from this? Well, for a start, new developers will be able to basically start web development in a few minutes, not several hours. The initial learning curve of starting web development is heavily reduced, so they don't have to immediately learn how to set up a web server, how to do database configuration. They will have to learn that eventually, we do realize, but the point is the coding is generally the easiest part. If they can start doing that straight away, then that's really powerful. They can basically get hooked, and then they will learn those other necessary skills as they progress and as they need them along the way. There's no huge upfront investment. And also the fact that they'll be basically doing best practice web development from day one. There's no more chmod 777 to just get it working now. It's already working, it's already best practice. They can basically explore that file structure and see how it's set up. For example, the Django template we've created splits up settings into different files for development, production, and staging, and also secret variables for things you don't want to have in version control at all. Also, we feel that experienced developers have a lot to gain from using Basil. For a start, you can learn new framework really easily now. And if, say, you're a Django developer and you've heard about Pyramid, you want to try out Pyramid, you no longer have to allocate a whole weekend just to getting things set up and trying things and following the details of configuring it from tutorials. You can just set up a new Basil project in a few minutes and start playing around with Pyramid, see how it works. We also feel if you're an experienced developer, you could create Basil templates as to be your standard way of setting up a new project. So to create your own custom template, you could just take an existing template and then fork it, make a few changes to the way it works. Making a template or changing a template is as simple as just knowing a bit about Vagrant and some configuration management, such as Puppet, Ansible, or Salt. You have the choice of what you prefer to use. And then also, once you've created a Basil template, you can then share that template with other developers, and they can try it out and see what you've done, and it will work on their system because everything's in a virtual machine, basically. Finally, another really useful application of Basil is for teaching, because if you've ever taught a programming class, you'll know that one of the most frustrating activities is getting 30 students all set up with the same development environment and it all working correctly. You'll probably have that one student who maybe misspelled a configuration file, and so their whole system isn't working, and you have two options. You could either spend half an hour trying to debug and figure out what exactly went wrong and that it was just a misspelled file name, and then all the rest of the class is left doing nothing, or you could basically leave that student behind and continue with the rest of the class. Basil solves this by just having it possible to have everyone spin up identical development environments, even if it's a BYOD situation, because it's virtual machines, it will work on any platform, and basically allows you to teach programming, not system administration. Not only that, Basil, we've open sourced the project, so students can take that home, try it out, get things set up, continue learning while they're away from the classroom. And finally, teachers could create custom templates to kind of vary the starting point for their students. So for example, if they have a project for the students where they want them to learn about writing views in Django, but not necessarily writing models, they could set up a Basil template that already has all the models already created in the project and just allow them to get straight to the learning, or basically the learning outcome that they're trying to achieve. Focus on that, not focus on all the other details. So,
okay. Alternatives to Basil. Well, you can write all your own shell scripts, and that's, pardon me, that's partly where we started. It's high maintenance. It's not usually cross-platform or shareable. It's not really a good solution. You can use Vagrant directly, but that doesn't take care of the templating, the setting everything up inside it.
Cool. So, yeah. So where do we want to go with Basil? What are our kind of short-term goals? Well, first of all, we want to get it working cross-platform. This is most of the way there because we work with Vagrant, and Vagrant is already set up to work cross-platform. And also the fact that we've written in Python, so the code will work. There's just a few things we need to work out to get it working across all platforms. At the moment, we've only tested on Ubuntu. We also want to get simple installers set up for all platforms so that you can, setting up Basil is just as easy as setting up a Basil project. We want to develop a command line interface so that those of you who prefer a command line workflow will not have to shift over to using the web application interface. And we feel, you could use the Vagrant command line interface, but the benefit of using Basil's interface is that you'll get all that templating solution, so you can just spin up a new project from an existing template. Another thing we want to look at is potentially using Docker containers instead of virtual machines. Vagrant supports that already, and we feel that with Docker containers we'd get the same sandboxed effect of a virtual machine without all the additional overhead of extra processing and extra space required on your computer. And finally, we'd like Basil to basically become a bit of a standard that if someone asks the question, how do I start Django development? The answer is, get Basil, install the Basil template, create a project in a few minutes, and go for it. And we'd love to see kind of an ecosystem of people creating templates and sharing those templates and making it much easier to start projects. Another point to mention is that because this is all just virtual machines and Vagrant, there is no tie to specifically Python. You could do this for any kind of development environment. So, for example, I've made a template already to set up a very basic LAMP stack for a class I was taking at MIT. And yeah, so that's basically where we're heading.
Okay, so if you're interested in following this project, the first thing is it's still under active development. You can find it on GitHub in the Catalyst account. Now's a good time to thank Catalyst for basically sponsoring our work. The code actually does work. It works quite well, but it has some rough edges in packaging and documentation. And if you do try it out on Mac or Windows or anything else, let us know how you go, or in fact anything that you experience with it. And we're ready for questions.
Yep.
So with the templates, does that just pull stuff out of like PyPy, like the actual packages, or does it supply its own?
Yes, so it's basically, it installs those packages using configuration management with Vagrant, and that will be downloading those packages from PyPy. It doesn't package it all together.
Well, I have a question. So what other ways can you see this being used with education?
Yep. Oh. Sorry.
I'm glad you asked me that. I think one of the really good things about the templates is because it's in a virtual machine, you really can just stick anything you want in there. You could stick in all sorts of resources, README files, and things like that, which helps students learn something in a specific point. So if they're messing around with the configuration of Apache or whatever you're trying to teach them, you can actually have all those files there in the place where you're trying to show where they're working. Yep.
I think I covered it.
Yep.
Do you actually use it at work, or was it more of a side project that luckily got sponsored by your employer?
So yeah, that was we built it. We built it at Catalyst, and we're hoping to use it more there once we've got it slightly more polished, and build more templates to work on different projects. Yeah.
On? Yes. Yep. So picking up on the education thing, how Do you see that there's like an integration with like perhaps IPython notebooks or something to give you a structured pedagogic space to then walk through? So rather than it being a, change your file upload, whatever, do you see there being an integration kind of paradigm there somewhere?
You should definitely come and talk to us.
I wouldn't have to do it. It just sounds like a good thing. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Thinking of it in terms of setting up development environments, this is perhaps a more general question. I don't know if people have experience with pointing IDEs into Docker containers and VMs and so on. Because I was just looking at that the other day and thinking, it'd be nice to set up a standard thing, but then I have to put the IDE inside it, and how do I make all that work?
Well, basically, in terms of source code files, you can use the IDE on your own computer because the files are shared from the virtual machine to your local machine. So that covers that. In terms of if you wanted, I don't know if your IDE integrated with the database, perhaps you'd have to forward those database ports out of the the template would have to configure the virtual machine so that the ports were forwarded to your local machine.
Yeah. Right. So if you download Django and you go through the tutorial, well, you get started pretty quickly, even on your own. You use SQLite. There's not much of system administration to be done. But what you're doing is you're trying to set it up in a way that is suitable for production, I believe, for production deployment. But that is not really the hurdle that a very new beginning sort of developer would really have to go through, right? So are you trying to solve the production setup problem too early, or what?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, I mean, that was why I really wanted to actually try it out with my son Elliot and Flask. We had a crack at learning Django earlier and working through the tutorials, and it's not actually as easy as it seems. I know they're very good, but they're actually not as easy as they seem, and it's very hard to assess that as a person who's probably already done them a lot of times and is very familiar with the concepts. Whereas with this, it was possible to just leave that all aside and get straight on with the, hello world, hello PyCon. Now I'll do CSS, so I'll style it. Now I'll put a JavaScript alert box in. Now I've got some JavaScript. Now I'll start my first AJAX call. So it wasn't about setting up a production environment. It was about just being able to start with something that was working and then incrementally learn from there without any giant hurdles in the way. So, yeah.
Any more questions? You want to make me run up and down the stairs some more? No? Okay. Well, if you have any more questions, I'm sure you guys will be around for the rest of the day. Please join me in thanking them.